Hello, welcome back to the Scalpel Cafe and welcome to part one of a new project. Little bit of a different format this time because this is going to be a quick two-parter, and I thought rather than having a separate intro and then breaking it all down, I'd include the intro as part of part one. The subject of this model is, it's up there, is it just in shot? I think it is. The Airfix JP Mk.3, and unusually I'm filming part one at the end of the project, and here it is, all finished. In this part, I'm going to deal with the cockpit and the construction of the model, and then part two will be the painting, finishing, weathering, that kind of thing, although there's not that much weathering going on. The idea behind this is I've always wanted to build this model. You can see loads online, all finished and all look fantastic, and I wanted one in my collection. So I bought one, managed to track down the Edward photo etch set for it, and if I'm perfectly honest, you don't need it if you're going to replace the seats. If you're going to use the kit seats, then actually I think the set's worth it because there's lots of detail going on for the ejection seats themselves. However, I've replaced the seats with some Barracuda resin ones. They're a little bit big, if I'm honest. I managed to shoehorn them in, but they make a real difference actually. They're really quite nicely detailed, if I'm honest. The other bits of photo etch, I didn't use all of it. A little bit for the undercarriage. All the canopy stuff I didn't use, and you'll find out in the wash-up at the end of why I didn't. Some aerials, some actuators, things like that. So it does mean it's a really nice refined model. Some of the air scoops, or the two air scoops on the top, are the photo etch ones as well. Anyway, without further ado, let's pop over to the bench and we'll kick off with the cockpit, and I'll do another little mini wash up at the end of the project at the end of part two. So I'll see you at the bench.
Okay, here we are. Welcome to the bench. And the first thing that I decided to do was remove all the molded detail that was in the fuselage halves. So you can see I've started off here with a motor tool, and I'll just go and I'll just remove as much as I can with the motor tool, just being careful that I'm not going to melt the plastic. Now this really isn't 100% required. I think you could quite easily get away with it. And it's a question of not rushing, taking your time, and once you've got the most of it off, you can go in with a curved blade like this and then do a bit of scrapage. Finishing off with a sanding stick, going in quite coarse initially and then going in finer to get rid of the scratches, although it doesn't really matter because it's all going to get covered up with photo etch. Just using the airbrush as a bit of compressed air, blast any stubborn bits out. And now for the photo etch, and I tend to do this on most bits of brass. Just give it a sand, that gives it a bit of a key. Just helps with the paint. See, quite a nice little set that. Annealing is a good idea if you're going to be bending parts around a curve. This is one of the side walls, and I'll just put it in a flame. And when it changes colour, it'll be ready, and it'll be less inclined to spring back. Don't do that, it's hot. So wait for it to cool down, put it in place, and then just using some pressure, I'll just push it in place, and that'll roughly set the curve, and then we'll glue and clamp that, and it should stick much better. It should have a much better gluing surface if the contours match. So going in with the ultra glue, absolutely superb stuff this. If you haven't used it, I highly recommend it. It's like an acrylic resin, so it's a bit like white glue in that it's water soluble, but it's a much stronger bond and dries crystal clear. It's absolutely brilliant stuff, perfect for photo etch. You do have more working time than you do with super glue, and the bond is essentially pretty much the same. So yeah, good idea to use this glue if you're going to drop it into the wrong place like I just did. ready for the next bit. Adding some of the smaller details here. A lot of it's going to be lost, if I'm honest, because it's a small cockpit and it is painted black. I'll go through the painting shortly, but before I do, on with the rudder pedals. And again, don't feel like you need to use them because you can't really see them. Instrument panel goes on next. I've made a couple of drill holes ready for some levers because there's photo etch that's going to go over the top of that. Some nicely detailed control columns can then just go in. Just using the coloured glue. No real reason other than I had it to hand. And now for some paint. So this is Mr. Surfacer Black as a primer. I have actually brush coated some VMS 4K metal prep, which is absolutely brilliant stuff. It does a really good job of etching into the metal and provides a really good undercoat. Belt and braces with the black primer. Didn't really need to use it, I don't think. There's some of the colour photo etch with some of the levers on. Again, it's all kind of lost in the black hole, which is a bit of a shame. This stuff's brilliant. Ammo dry brush paint. It's acrylic, and who'd have thought you can get acrylic dry brush paint, but it works really well. And then I'll just go over with a black sort of filter wash, highlight all the details, and that'll tone down that dry brushing, and it will reveal some of that detail. Yeah, now I should have done this before, clearly. I forgot to remove the kit seat supports, which clearly are going to get in the way of the resin. Time for the instrument panel. So the backing goes on, bit of super glue and standard layered effect. And I thought I'd give this stuff a go. This is what ladies use to put on their nails to make them nice and shiny, and it's cured with UV. And I thought I could use that to stick the instrument panel on and put a coat on it. I've already matte coated the photo etch. I'll give that a bit of a squeeze, and then we'll get the UV torch on it. This will cure it rock hard. Well, that's the theory, and it did. Yeah, only in the exposed bits, obviously, and then later on it fell off, which was a bit of a pain. So I ended up using the ultra glue in the end anyway. A couple of small bits go on. It's the radio controller that's on the left and some of the black box on the right. Didn't quite line it up properly, but anyway, you can see the detail there. Lovely. All to get buried into the cockpit. Adding a bit of weight, using a bit of liquid gravity and a nut. And if you forget, it doesn't matter, because you can pour it into the hole where the nose wheel goes. So if you forget and you got some liquid gravity, it doesn't really matter. Time to glue the fuselages together now, using my black super glue and these applicator tips that I got. They're dirt cheap, got them off Amazon, and a bit of a game changer for me. Means you don't get that sort of stringiness. It's a lot more neat and tidy. It's a lot more precise than just putting a blob on the desk and then using a old knife blade or something. And I swear by this now. So we can just put that together, give it a squeeze, add a bit of accelerator, and then what I tend to do is go over the top of the seam with another layer of super glue just to seal everything in, and then it can all be sanded straight away. It's really quick, no shrinkage at all. It's quite strong stuff, this black super glue. It's got a bit of sort of rubberizer in it, so it's less brittle than the normal super glue, and I can't see myself going back to liquid cement, if I'm honest. Not for fuselage halves anyway. So as I mentioned, just going over the top of the seam just to make sure it's all sealed in. And we'll just touch that in with some accelerator. You do have to be quite careful with accelerator actually. It can bubble up, get little pinholes in it. So just watch out for that. So you might not want to use it every time. And then we can just go in with various grades of sanding stick and we'll just sand all that smooth and polish it. Try and get rid of all the scratches. And then we can restore all the detail. You can see there a few little pinholes showed up by the sanding dust. No drama. Go in with a bit more glue. Another layer. That's probably because I've used the accelerator. And as I said, it's exothermic, the reaction. Quite a bit of heat. And it does gas off. So they are sort of tiny little pinholes caused by that. Again, compressed air, get rid of some of the sanding's dust, and that's the seam done. Now we've got to restore it all. Trusty razor saw. This is from Ask or ASK, I'm not sure which. Please put it in the comments. Is it ASK or is it Ask? And I can just go in and lightly, very lightly, just use the existing panel line as a guide, and just with a kind of rolling motion as I pull it back, I can restore that panel line. I quite like using the saw over the panel line, over the scriber. It's not too bad over the super glue, if I'm honest, but if I have used any kind of liquid cement, traditional plastic sort of poly blah, then it can be a little bit soft and things can dig in like scribers and whatnot, and I do find this de-risks the whole thing. Notice I'm pulling, not pushing. If you push, you can go a little bit awry, and I did do that on the top of the fuselage. I got a bit cocky, went forward, and it popped out the groove, and I put a nice scratch in the surface, which I then had to repair, which was a pain in the bum. Anyway, once we've done that, we can just give that a quick polish. This is a well-worn sanding sponge. That will just knock any of the burrs down. We can go in with some compressed air. You might see the appearance of a toothbrush at some point as well, and then just using some Tamiya quick setting, draw it over the top, and what that'll do is just melt any sort of swarf or anything. Tailplane, that just slots in from the back. Nice solid fit, although I did use a little bit of filler just to try and tidy things up a little bit. Doesn't really need it, you could get away with it, but you know, I'm a bit of a perfectionist at times. Giving the bottle a little shake. It's getting a little bit low. I do need to refill it. There we are. So that's on, ready for the next bits. Let that dry. So I mentioned a little bit of filler. This stuff's really good as well. Really easy to apply and really easy to sort of feather in and get rid of the excess. So I'm just using a silicone brush here, and we'll just push that into the sort of slight recess. I'm making a bit of a mess of this. Might have been an idea to put some sort of tape down because it does get in the panel lines, but I've got some sharp tweezers and we can just use that to clean it out. Always a bit of a main event in any aeroplane model is the wing to fuselage join, and it's beautiful in this kit. Not perfect, as I'll point out in a moment. But it just really clicks in. It's great. The contours don't quite match. Maybe because I've sanded the fuselage seam, that's lowered it just a little bit. So there's a little step there at the back. So that had a bit of sandage, and then the panel lines were restored. Same for the front. That was a little bit proud. Now, if you do look at aeroplanes closely, you'll find that the panels aren't perfect. They are a little bit proud here and there. but obviously this is 72nd scale, so it's going to be pretty imperceptible. Even the most agricultural, Russian stuff. Mr. Hobby 2-part epoxy going on here. This is one of my favourite fillers. Doesn't shrink and ends up sanding and scribing just like plastic. It feathers in beautifully. So if you are running a scriber from plastic into the filler or vice versa, it won't sort of stick, it won't chip like some of the chalky fillers can, or some of the solvent fillers can. And yeah, it's just absolutely brilliant stuff. I swear by it. It's amazing. Dries quite quickly as well, but I will leave it overnight. In fact, 24 hours. Only because I've got to go to work the next day, which is a nightmare. It's not a nightmare, actually. I quite enjoy work, but you know what I mean. We'd all rather be modelling, I think. And you can see there, I'm following the instructions. Just gluing in the bottom wing and leaving the top wing separate. I nearly went my own way and did the traditional make a proper set of wings and then add it to the fuselage. But I thought, no, Airfix, they know what they're doing. So I'm going to follow the instructions and see what happens. And actually, I'm pleased to report it worked an absolute treat. Decided on the tip tanks to use the super glue, and then I'll just use traditional liquid cement for the leading and trailing edges. Just making sure it's all going to line up properly. I don't want to make too much of a mess. And then we can just add a bit of pressure at the wingtip, squeeze the excess glue out. And then we'll treat that the same as the fuselage half. So a bit of accelerator, coat over the top, and then we can sand it back. A little bit difficult to get the sander right into the corner there, but did manage it. Just polishing up the sanding job. And yeah, really quick. As I mentioned, normal glue going on the leading edge, perfect fit here. You know, some of the best fitting parts I've ever had on a model aeroplane. This one, just beautiful. I think the new dark plastic Airfix have makes a difference, makes a significant difference. In fact, I'm so glad they've done that. That horrible soapy light coloured plastic was horrid. This, you get much sharper detail, and it has improved the fit. Almost kind of like as if the designer, you know, the way the designer intended kind of thing. Anyway, enough eulogising, more modelling. Really pleased with how that's gone, and then we'll just let that dry, and the next day we'll sand the seams. Just a bit of belt and braces just to seal the join here. Didn't really need it, if I'm honest. But as I mentioned, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. This is Mr. Surfacer 500. Applied with a little brush. We'll let that dry, and then we'll go in with a bit of thinner on a cotton bud, and then we can just tidy that up. Belt and braces again on the leading edge. It all polished away and disappeared. Absolutely pointless doing this step. Gave me peace of mind though. Yeah. Bit of a thumbprint here. Bit of damage. Just from the liquid glue. So going in with some Display sanders. And a bit of water, and I'm just going to polish the plastic, and we'll just get rid of that. A 5-minute job just to clean that up. It's always annoying when it happens though. The joint here, this is where obviously I put the filler in, and it was all sanded, contours matched up, and then using the same technique, just very lightly dragging it, just using the weight of the tool, dragging it backwards, slight rocking motion, making sure I'm following the panel lines. Holding my breath every time I do it, especially when I go forward. Oh, I really shouldn't be doing that going forward. Using some display carving tape here just to restore the panel lines at the front. I did end up filling it completely and went in and restored them. No trouble at all. On to the intakes. 2-part intakes. The inner part going in first, and that was just applied with liquid cement. And you can see how small that the opening is. Now they are see-through. But actually, yeah, even though the whole fuselage is open and you can look right at the jet pipe, the intakes are so small and on an angle, it doesn't matter. So you don't need to come up with some sort of jet pipe down the back. If you paint it black, that's good enough. But you can see I painted red on the inside of the intakes. So I did follow the instructions for that. Saw it slightly out of shot there. Just gluing the outer part on. Slight mismatch. So I did go in with the epoxy filler again. Slight step as well. So as I said, the contours didn't match perfectly. But we'll just push that into place using a wet finger. We'll just smooth that out. It doesn't dissolve in water, this stuff. It's hydrophobic. It does repel. It's got some sort of plasticizer in it, which I really like. So it's not very good for tight joins, such as wing roots and things like that. Because that is going to be awkward to sand, because you can only sand this stuff. And then we'll just go in with the display sort of sanding things. So working our way through the different grits. We'll just sand it on the contours. You can get a nice sort of sharp edge with this, if you know what I mean. So you can go right in there into the join with the wing root. That's all fine. So using water as well, that's going to help lubricate the surface. You can see there I've just used a bit of tape just to protect the cockpit. I don't want to fill it up with wet sanding dust if I can help it. Finer and finer grades. Just protecting the leading edge as well. And just using the corner there and pushing it into that recess. It's quite sharp actually in there. And that will just make sure that I can keep all the contours together. And I'm not going to sand in any flat spots or anything like that. Yeah, tiny hairline gap just underneath. Perfect plastic putty to the rescue again. Bit of matte paint on the combing, you can see there. That was the new ammo stuff. Right, and then I swallowed the biggest brave pill I could find. And I sanded off all the framing and polished up the canopy. So this is the windscreen. Slightly different on the clear bit at the back. That was glued in place, and then I smothered it in the perfect plastic putty, and then I sanded it dry. So I didn't use any water here, and then I just polished it back up. I did actually have, just in the corner here, it was rounded off. I don't know if that was a short shot or whether I sanded in the wrong place. But anyway, I just backed it up with a bit of vinyl, added some of that UV resin blah, and then sanded it and repolished it, and it disguised it very well actually. I was quite pleased with how that turned out. Another first for me. This is the main canopy. You can see how thick the sort of framing is. There it's all been removed, and then we're just going to go in with those display sanders and some of the Ammo MIG sanders as well, and go finer and finer and finer. So you can see it's very smooth but cloudy, very shiny but a little bit cloudy still. and then we'll end up with the motor tool and the polisher and the polishing compound, and we'll polish it back to clarity. And that's the end of the construction. Next will be the painting and the weathering. So I'll see you there. Cheers, bye bye.